In the vast, glittering halls of the royal palace, the alien king sat upon his throne, a powerful figure among his kind. His eyes were cold, his mind sharp, and his rule unchallenged across the empire. Yet there was one part of his life that had always disappointed him: his daughter, Lyanna. For years, the king had watched her grow, but instead of becoming the fierce warrior he had hoped for, she remained fragile, unsure of herself, and seemingly incapable of handling the responsibilities of royal life. Princess Lyanna, with her soft features and gentle nature, had always been an embarrassment to her father. Despite her noble blood, she lacked the strength, courage, and discipline required of a royal heir. The king had long hoped that one day she would develop the warrior spirit that had made his ancestors legendary. But that day never came. Instead, Lyanna had spent her days in the palace gardens, reading ancient texts, or quietly walking through the halls, lost in her own thoughts. The king had tried everything to make her stronger. He had brought in the finest warriors, the most skilled instructors, and the bravest generals to teach her. But nothing worked. Lyanna could never match the strength of the others. She would falter in battle drills, lose focus in strategic exercises, and often she would retreat into herself, unable to connect with the demands of the world around her. One fateful morning, as the king sat in his grand chamber overseeing reports from his generals, he made a decision that would forever change Lyanna's life. His advisors had warned him that his daughter's weakness could undermine the royal family, but he had tolerated it for far too long. The king stood, his shadow casting a long, imposing figure across the cold stone floor. He had made up his mind. It was time for Lyanna to leave the palace, to go to another world, to face the challenges that the galaxy had to offer. Perhaps only in the harshest conditions would she finally grow into the warrior she needed to be. "Send for my daughter," the king ordered, his voice carrying the weight of finality. Moments later, Lyanna entered the room. She wore her usual calm expression, unaware of the storm brewing in her father's mind. The king studied her for a moment, his piercing eyes narrowing. She looked so much like her mother, kind, gentle, and serene. But those traits had no place in the warrior's life that the king had envisioned for her. "Lyanna," the king began, his voice cold and distant, "you have failed to live up to the expectations of this kingdom. You have been a disappointment to me, and I have no more patience for weakness." Lyanna stood there, her heart sinking, unsure of what was happening. She had always known that her father was disappointed in her, but hearing it so bluntly made her feel smaller than ever. "You will leave this palace," the king continued. "I am sending you to Earth, to a human named Alex. He is a soldier, a warrior. He will teach you the strength that you lack. Under his guidance, you will either rise to the challenge or fall into obscurity." Lyanna's eyes widened in shock. Earth, a human soldier. The thought of leaving her home planet, of leaving everything she had ever known, was terrifying. She had no idea who this human was or what kind of training he would put her through. But the king's words were clear. There was no room for argument, no space for negotiation. Her fate was sealed. "But father," she began, her voice trembling. She had never been able to stand up to him, not in any meaningful way. "No more words," the king cut her off. "You will leave immediately. If you survive and learn what it means to be strong, then you may return. If not, you will remain forgotten by the empire. It is your choice, Lyanna. Make it wisely." Lyanna felt a wave of fear rush over her, but also something else. Something that felt like the first stirrings of anger. She was not useless. She knew she had potential, even if no one else saw it. Maybe, just maybe, this was the chance she needed to prove herself, to show the world, especially her father, that she was capable of more than he believed. She took a deep breath, her shoulders straightening, a spark of determination lighting her eyes. "I will go," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her heart. "I will prove that I am not weak." The king gave a small nod of approval, but his expression remained unchanged. "Good. You leave at once. The human will be waiting for you on Earth. Do not fail." And with that, Lyanna was dismissed. She turned and walked out of the room, her heart heavy with the weight of the journey ahead. As she prepared to leave the palace, she couldn't shake the thought of what lay beyond the stars. Would she find the strength her father wanted? Or would she return to him, still the helpless princess he had always seen her as? One thing was certain, Lyanna was determined to change her fate. She would go to Earth and meet this human soldier, Alex, and she would return, stronger, better, and more than just the king's useless daughter. Lyanna's journey to Earth was long and uncomfortable. As she traveled through the stars, leaving behind the vast and glittering planet of her birth, she couldn't help but feel a knot tighten in her stomach. The stars seemed to mock her, cold and distant, much like her father's words. She had no idea what awaited her, no clear idea of what kind of human soldier this Alex would be. Would he be kind, harsh, or would he be just another person who looked at her and saw nothing more than a spoiled princess? The trip was a blur of isolation, with only the soft hum of the ship's engines keeping her company. Lyanna spent her days pacing the ship's small living quarters, her thoughts racing. She thought of her father's words, of the expectations she had never met, of the power she had never known. She had never been trained to fight, never learned the true meaning of strength. But now she had no choice. Earth was her chance to prove herself, not only to her father but to herself. When Lyanna finally arrived on Earth, it was nothing like what she had imagined. The planet was vast and alive with strange sights and sounds. Her ship landed in a quiet military base, surrounded by green fields and towering trees. There was no grand reception, no welcoming party. Instead, standing by a simple transport vehicle, was a man, Alex. He was tall, strong, and dressed in simple yet practical military attire. His sharp eyes studied her as she stepped out of the ship, her posture stiff and uncertain. Lyanna took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The human soldier's gaze made her feel small, vulnerable even. She had faced her father's disapproval, but this was different. This was real. Alex didn't smile or offer pleasantries. Instead, he gave her a curt nod, his expression unreadable. "Welcome to Earth," he said, his voice low and steady. "I'm Alex. I'll be your instructor from here on out. There's no time for small talk, princess. We'll start training immediately." Lyanna felt a surge of discomfort at his directness, but she bit back any response. She had come here to learn. She had come here to prove herself. If Alex thought she was just a helpless princess, she would show him otherwise. Without another word, Alex led her to a nearby training area. The space was surrounded by tall metal walls and equipped with various obstacles, targets, and weaponry. It looked like nothing she had ever seen before. Lyanna had spent her life in the royal palace, surrounded by luxury, with no real understanding of what it meant to fight or survive. "Your first lesson," Alex said, his voice sharp, "is to forget everything you think you know about combat. Forget the pampered life you've lived. You're here to learn how to survive, how to fight, and how to win. If you can't do that, then you won't survive. Simple as that." Lyanna stood still for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. She had always been sheltered, always protected from the harsh realities of life. But this was different. Here on Earth, there was no protection. There was only strength. She felt a flicker of determination rise within her. She wasn't going to let this human think she was weak. She would prove him wrong. Alex handed her a basic combat training weapon, a simple staff. It wasn't as glamorous as the swords or energy blades she had seen in her father's palace, but it was a start. "Let's see what you've got," Alex said, stepping back. "Defend yourself." Lyanna raised the staff, holding it awkwardly in her hands. Her grip felt too tight, too unsure. She had never held a weapon before. She had always relied on the beauty of her speech, her presence in the royal court. But here, none of that mattered. Here, her words meant nothing. It was her actions that would speak for her. Alex moved quickly, circling around her. Before she could react, he struck, knocking the staff from her hands with a swift motion. Lyanna stumbled back, shocked by the speed and precision of his attack. She had expected some kind of struggle, some kind of defense, but she had been completely unprepared. "You've got potential," Alex said, his tone devoid of sympathy. "But that won't be enough. You need to think faster, move quicker, and anticipate your opponent's next move. Your body needs to move as one with your mind. You've got to stop thinking of yourself as a princess and start thinking of yourself as a warrior. That means no hesitation, no weakness." Lyanna picked up the staff again, her hands trembling. But this time, something was different. The sting of failure burned in her chest. But it wasn't just failure. It was the realization that she had never been pushed to this point before. For the first time, she was being forced to face the truth about her own limitations. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. She wouldn't let Alex see her falter. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of knowing that she was scared. She gripped the staff tighter and took her stance. "Again," Alex said, his voice still firm. This time, Lyanna was ready. She focused on her breathing, on her body's movements. She watched Alex's every motion, trying to anticipate his next strike. When he came at her again, she was ready. She blocked his strike with a fluid motion, her staff connecting with his in a burst of force. For the first time, she felt the power in her own body, the strength she had been hiding all these years. Alex paused for a moment, surprised by the sudden change in her. There was a brief flicker of approval in his eyes, but he didn't speak. He just nodded and moved on to the next lesson. Lyanna had taken her first step. She wasn't the weak princess anymore. She wasn't the helpless girl her father had cast aside. She was a warrior, and she would learn to fight. She would prove herself, not just to Alex, but to herself. Days turned into weeks, and Lyanna found herself waking up each morning with a mixture of excitement and fear. The fear was still there, a quiet voice in the back of her mind, telling her she wasn't good enough. But the excitement, that was new. It was the spark of something she hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose. Alex had proven to be a harsh teacher, but one who never wasted a moment. Every day brought a new challenge. Every lesson tested her limits. It was grueling, exhausting, and often frustrating. But Lyanna was determined. She had come here to prove herself, not just to her father, but to herself. No longer would she be the useless princess. She was going to be a warrior. Her first few days had been a blur of failures. She had been slow, clumsy, and uncoordinated. But with each mistake, she learned. Each misstep became an opportunity to improve. At first, the frustration nearly broke her. There were times when she wanted to throw down her weapon and walk away. There were times when she wanted to cry, to scream at the unfairness of it all. But each time, Alex would stand silently, waiting for her to pick up the weapon again, waiting for her to keep going. "You're not here to be perfect," Alex would say. "You're here to survive, to fight, to become better than who you were yesterday." And slowly, she began to understand. It wasn't about being flawless. It was about never giving up, about pushing through the pain and the doubt. The more she trained, the more she felt her body changing. Her movements became sharper, faster. She was no longer the fragile girl who stumbled in combat. She was starting to become someone else, a fighter, a warrior. Lyanna learned to handle a variety of weapons, swords, spears, and even strange tools from Earth that she never thought she would use. She learned how to block, how to strike, and how to think ahead in battle. Every move Alex taught her became ingrained in her muscles, her mind. She started to think like a warrior, to see the world through the eyes of someone who had to survive, not just exist. One of the hardest lessons had been hand-to-hand combat. It was brutal and intense, requiring both strength and agility. At first, Lyanna had struggled with it. She was smaller and weaker than Alex, and the first few times they sparred, she was easily overpowered. But Alex didn't go easy on her. He showed no mercy. He would knock her down, then pull her back up, only to do it again and again. "There's no honor in staying down," he would say. "The only way you'll learn is if you get up." Every time. It hurt. Every day. She felt the bruises on her skin, the soreness in her muscles. But with every bruise, she grew stronger. With every fall, she learned to get up faster. Her body became leaner, more powerful. Her mind became sharper, more strategic. Alex's words started to sink in. There was no room for weakness, no room for hesitation. She had to fight with everything she had. And then, one day, something changed. Alex had been pushing her harder than ever, testing her limits, making her fight longer and harder than she ever thought she could. They had just finished a particularly tough training session, and Lyanna was gasping for breath, her muscles burning. "You've done well today," Alex said, his tone softer than usual. Lyanna looked up at him, still panting. She had expected more criticism, more of the usual harsh words. But something in his expression had shifted. There was a flicker of approval in his eyes, something she had never seen before. "You're stronger than I thought," Alex said, almost as if he were surprised by it. "You've come a long way in a short time. I can see it now. You're not the same person you were when you arrived." Lyanna felt a warmth spread through her chest. For the first time since she had left her home planet, she felt like she was actually doing something right. She had struggled for so long to find her place, to find a purpose. And now she could see that all her hard work was paying off. But even as she allowed herself a moment of pride, the training was not over. There was still so much more to learn, so much more to prove. Lyanna knew she couldn't stop now. She couldn't let herself get comfortable. Her father had thrown her away, believing she was useless. But she wasn't done proving him wrong. That night, as she lay in her small quarters, Lyanna thought about the journey that lay ahead. She wasn't the helpless princess anymore. She wasn't the weak girl who had been cast aside. She was becoming something else, someone strong, someone capable. But the real test was yet to come. She knew that. She had learned how to fight, how to survive, but there was still one thing that haunted her. Would it be enough? In the end, it wasn't just about surviving the challenges Alex had set for her. It was about facing her own doubts, her own fears, and pushing beyond them. It was about embracing who she was becoming, not just in the eyes of her father, but in her own eyes. The warrior Lyanna was born on Earth, and nothing would stand in her way. After months of rigorous training, Lyanna stood at the edge of the training field, watching the sun set over the distant horizon. The sky, painted with shades of purple and orange, reflected the changes within her. She was no longer the girl who had boarded that ship to Earth. She had transformed. Her body was stronger, her mind sharper, and her confidence more solid than ever before. Alex had been a tough teacher, but his lessons had shaped her into something new. She had learned the importance of resilience, the value of never giving up, and the strength that could be found even in moments of failure. Now, as she prepared to return to her home planet, Lyanna couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Would she be able to face her father? Would he even recognize the woman she had become? She had spent so much time in his shadow, trying to live up to his impossible expectations, that now she wasn't sure what her return would mean. But one thing was clear. Lyanna was no longer the helpless princess who had been sent away to Earth. She was a warrior now, and she would face whatever came next with determination and strength. The night before her departure, Alex found her standing outside, her gaze lost in the stars. He walked up behind her, his footsteps quiet but steady. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice steady as always. Lyanna turned to face him, her expression thoughtful. "I don't know if I'm ready for everything that's coming," she said quietly, "but I know I'm ready to face it. I've learned so much here, Alex. I've learned what it means to be strong, to fight, to never give up. And I'm not going back as the same person. I'll show them that I am more than just a princess. I will show them what I've become." Alex nodded, his expression unreadable. You've come a long way, Lyanna. But remember, no matter what happens when you get back to your planet, keep your focus. Don't let anyone make you doubt yourself. You're stronger than you realize." Lyanna gave him a small smile. "Thank you. I couldn't have done it without you." Alex looked away for a moment, as if the words were difficult for him to say. "You've got it in you, Lyanna. You're ready. Just don't forget that you've got the heart of a warrior now." The next morning, Lyanna boarded the ship that would take her back to her home planet. The journey was long, but this time, the hours passed differently. The nervousness that had once consumed her was now replaced by a quiet confidence. She thought about everything she had learned, about how far she had come. There was no way she would return as the same girl she had been. When the ship finally landed on her home planet, Lyanna felt a wave of emotions wash over her. The air was thick with the familiar sense of her homeland, the sights of the towering spires of the palace in the distance. For a moment, it almost felt like nothing had changed. But then she stepped off the ship, and everything felt different. She was met by a group of royal guards who stared at her in surprise. They had been expecting a fragile princess, the one who had left in disgrace. But the woman who stood before them was strong, tall, and confident. Her posture was no longer that of a scared girl, but of someone who had found their place in the world. "Your Highness," one of the guards said hesitantly, clearly unsure how to address the woman before them. "The king is expecting you." Lyanna nodded. She had spent her whole life trying to meet her father's expectations, but this time it was different. This time she would show him that she had learned the true meaning of strength. This time she would stand her ground. When she entered the throne room, her father was seated on his grand throne, his expression as cold and stern as ever. But when his eyes fell on her, they narrowed in disbelief. For a long moment, the king said nothing. He simply stared at her, as though trying to understand what had changed. Lyanna stood tall, meeting his gaze without flinching. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. She wasn't afraid of what he thought of her. "Well, well," the king finally said, his voice low and controlled. "I see that you have returned, but you've come back as a different person. You look stronger." "I am stronger," Lyanna replied firmly, "and I am not the same person you sent away. I've learned what it means to fight, to survive, and to lead. I'm not here to be a pawn in your court anymore. I'm here to prove that I am worthy of my place, not because of my title, but because of what I've become." The king's eyes flickered with a mixture of surprise and something else, perhaps pride, though he would never admit it. "I see," he said slowly. "You believe you are ready for a place of power. But power is not something to be taken lightly, Lyanna. It must be earned. And you have not yet proven yourself in the way I expected." Lyanna stepped forward, her voice strong. "I don't need your approval anymore, Father. I've proven it to myself. I've learned to fight for what I believe in, to lead with strength and honor. I've learned that I am more than what you made me believe, and I will show you that I can lead, not because of my bloodline, but because I have earned it." The king sat back in his throne, studying his daughter with a new, more contemplative expression. It was clear that Lyanna's return had shaken him. She was no longer the fragile, weak princess who had been pushed aside. She was someone to be reckoned with, someone who had earned her place as a true warrior. And for the first time in his life, the king began to wonder if perhaps Lyanna had become something more than he had ever imagined. The tension in the throne room was thick, like the air before a storm. Lyanna stood before her father, her heart pounding, but her stance steady. For the first time in her life, she felt as though she was no longer the one who needed to prove herself. She had come back as someone different, someone stronger, someone who had fought for every ounce of the power she now carried. Her father, the alien king, sat on his grand throne, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. The king had seen many warriors rise and fall, but Lyanna's return was unlike any he had ever expected. She wasn't the delicate princess he had sent away. She wasn't the weakling who had failed to meet his expectations. This was someone else, someone who had found the strength to stand on her own. The king's voice broke the silence. You dare stand here, in my presence, speaking of power as though you have earned it. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, an anger that had been building for years, ever since Lyanna had left the palace. You have trained with humans. You think that their methods will make you stronger. You think that their ways will make you worthy of ruling this empire. Lyanna did not flinch. I don't need your approval anymore, Father. I have earned this strength. I have proven it to myself. I know what it means to fight, to lead, and to stand on my own 2 feet. I've learned more in the time I've spent away from you than I ever did under your roof. I've learned that I am not just your daughter. I am a warrior in my own right. The king's face darkened. A warrior? You, a warrior? He stood up from his throne, his towering figure casting a shadow over Lyanna. You are nothing. You are just a child who has been deceived by human teachings. They don't understand our ways. They are weak. And so are you. His words stung, but Lyanna didn't back down. She had heard these words from him her whole life. She had been called weak, fragile, and useless more times than she could count. But now, with the training she had endured and the strength she had gained, she knew that he was wrong. She wasn't weak. She was capable. You may think I'm weak, she said, her voice unwavering, but I am stronger than you ever gave me credit for. I didn't need to be your perfect little princess. I needed to find my own path. I needed to learn how to fight for what's right, not just what you told me was right. The king's eyes flashed with fury, and in an instant, his anger exploded. You dare speak to me like this, after everything I have done for you. I gave you everything, and you repay me with defiance. Lyanna took a step forward, her voice steady but firm. I'm not defying you, Father. I'm standing up for myself. For the first time in my life, I'm choosing my own path. And if that means standing against you, then so be it. The king's fists clenched at his sides, and for a moment, it looked like he might strike her. But he didn't. Instead, he turned away, pacing in a circle, his mind clearly racing. You are my daughter, he muttered, almost to himself. But you are not the heir I wanted. You are not the warrior I hoped for. Lyanna stood her ground, her heart pounding, but she held herself together. She had prepared for this moment for so long. She had come back to prove her worth, not just to her father, but to herself. The king had always seen her as a failure, as someone who would never live up to the empire's expectations. But she was done living in his shadow. She was done seeking his approval. Father, she said, her voice softer now, but still strong. I'm not here to replace you. I'm here to show that I can lead, that I can be strong in my own way. I'm not your failure. I'm your future. The king stopped pacing and turned to face her, his face hard as stone, his eyes narrowed. And for a moment, it seemed as though he might never accept her. But then, something in his gaze shifted. He didn't say a word, but the faintest flicker of uncertainty passed across his face. Perhaps, he said after a long pause, his voice colder now, you think you are ready. But the empire is not a place for weaklings. If you wish to lead, you must prove it. I will not hand over power to someone who cannot even prove themselves in battle. Lyanna's heart skipped a beat. She had expected something like this. Her father had always been about power, about proving one's worth through strength. But she was no longer the naive girl who had been cast aside. She knew what she had to do. I will prove it, Father, she said with a new determination. I will prove that I am worthy of this empire. I will lead, not with your approval, but with my own strength. The king studied her for a long moment, and for the first time, Lyanna saw something in his eyes that she had never expected, respect. It was fleeting, but it was there. And in that moment, Lyanna realized that her father was beginning to understand. She was no longer the weak princess he had once known. She was a warrior, one who had fought for her place in the world. You may try, the king said, his voice colder than ever. But know this, if you fail, You will not get another chance. The Empire will never accept someone who cannot stand strong in battle. Lyanna nodded, her expression firm. I will not fail. With that, she turned and left the throne room, her heart racing. She had made her choice, and there was no turning back now. Whatever lay ahead, she was ready. She was a warrior, and she would fight for the future she had earned. The days following her confrontation with her father were filled with tension. The king's words had hung heavy in the air, and though Lyanna had stood firm in her resolve, the reality of what lay ahead was starting to weigh on her. Her father had demanded that she prove herself through battle, a test she knew she couldn't ignore. He wanted to see strength, to see power, and Lyanna was determined to show him that she was more than just a daughter. She was a force in her own right. In the following weeks, Lyanna threw herself into preparation. She spent every moment practicing her combat skills, sharpening her mind, and refining her strategies. But as the days passed, she couldn't ignore the growing whispers within the palace. The kingdom was restless. There were murmurs of rebellion, whispers of those who were dissatisfied with the king's rule. Lyanna had always known that her father's reign was not without its challenges, but she hadn't realized just how much discontent simmered beneath the surface. One evening, as Lyanna stood at the balcony of the royal palace, looking out over the city, a figure approached from behind. She turned to find Alex, the human who had helped shape her into the warrior she had become. His face was serious, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced with a look of concern. Something's happening, Lyanna, Alex said quietly. I've been hearing things. There are people who want change. People who believe your father's rule is no longer what's best for the Empire. Lyanna's heart skipped a beat. She had suspected that something was off, but she hadn't anticipated it to be this serious. Her father's grip on the Empire had always been tight, but even he had his enemies. What do you mean? She asked, trying to steady her breath. Is there an uprising? Alex nodded. There are whispers of a rebellion brewing. Small factions have begun to form, and it looks like they're growing stronger. They believe the king is too focused on his own power, and they want change. They see you as someone who could lead them. Lyanna frowned, her thoughts racing. She had just returned home, determined to prove herself to her father. But now, she was caught in the middle of something much bigger than she had anticipated. The rebellion was not just about her father's rule. It was about the future of the entire empire. I don't want to get involved in a rebellion, Lyanna said, shaking her head. But if they want change, they're going to need more than just whispers. They'll need a leader, someone who can unite the different factions. Alex stepped closer, his voice low but firm. You could be that leader. You've already proven your strength. You've shown that you're not afraid to stand up to your father. And you're the only one who could bring these factions together. If you lead them, you might be able to topple your father's regime and create something new. Lyanna was silent for a moment, her mind whirling. She had spent so long trying to prove herself to her father, but now she was being asked to challenge everything he had built. She didn't know if she was ready to tear down the empire that had been the foundation of her life. But she also knew that this was her chance to change things, to shape the future in her own image, to lead in a way that her father never had. I didn't come back to overthrow my father, Lyanna said quietly. I came back to prove I could lead. But if this empire is falling apart, if people are suffering under his rule, then maybe this is the change that needs to happen. Alex nodded, understanding her internal struggle. It's not about replacing your father. It's about doing what's right for the people. You have the strength, Lyanna. You've been trained to lead. If you want to bring about real change, you have to be willing to take that step. Lyanna took a deep breath, her mind made up. I'm not doing this for revenge. I'm doing this for the people of this empire. If they want change, then I will lead them. As she spoke the words, something inside of her clicked. She wasn't just Lyanna, the discarded princess. She was Lyanna, the warrior who had earned her strength. And now, she was Lyanna, the leader who would fight for her people, no matter the cost. The next day, Lyanna sent out a call to the leaders of the rebellion, asking for a meeting. She knew it wouldn't be easy. She would have to convince them that she was the leader they needed, not just a daughter rebelling against her father. But she also knew that she couldn't do this alone. She needed allies, people who would follow her into battle. As the meeting room filled with representatives from different factions, Lyanna stood at the head of the table, her posture strong, her eyes unwavering. She had trained for this moment, and she wasn't about to back down. The people in the room watched her closely, their eyes filled with doubt and suspicion. They didn't know her. They didn't know what she had been through. But they would learn. "I'm not here to fight for power," Lyanna began, her voice strong and clear. "I'm here to fight for the future of this empire. For too long, we have been ruled by fear, by a king who only cared about his own strength. I've learned what it means to lead, and I know that together, we can build something better. But we have to be willing to stand together. We have to unite, or we will fall apart." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of her words settling in. Lyanna could see the doubt in their eyes, but she also saw something else: hope. She was the leader they had been waiting for, the one who could bring them all together. She was the key to the change they all sought. The first step had been taken. The rebellion had found its leader. Lyanna stood at the edge of the battlefield, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The air was thick with the sounds of war, shouts, the clatter of weapons, and the steady march of soldiers. The final battle was at hand, and everything she had worked for was about to come to a head. Her father's empire, built on years of power and fear, was now crumbling. The people had spoken. They had chosen change, and Lyanna, the daughter he had once abandoned, was the one who would lead them to it. The rebellion had grown stronger in the weeks since her first meeting with the leaders of the factions. Together, they had built an army not just of warriors, but of people who believed in the idea of a new empire, one where strength was measured by honor, not oppression. Lyanna had worked tirelessly, not only to train who to unite them under one cause. It wasn't just about toppling her father anymore. It was about giving the people a voice, about creating a future where they could live without fear. Now the battle lines had been drawn. The king's forces, though powerful, were divided. Many of the royal soldiers had defected, joining Lyanna's cause. Those who remained loyal to the king were entrenched in the palace, ready to defend it to the end. Lyanna knew this would be the most difficult fight of her life, but she was ready. Alex, her trusted friend and mentor, stood by her side. He had trained her, taught her the value of perseverance, and helped shape her into the leader she was today. His presence gave her strength, and though he wasn't one of her people, he had become a symbol of everything she had learned. Together, they had fought for this moment. "We fight for more than just a throne," Lyanna said to Alex, her voice steady but full of resolve. "We fight for the future, for the people who believe in us. This isn't just about taking down my father. It's about creating something better." Alex nodded, his eyes focused on the battlefield ahead. "You've got this, Lyanna. You've trained for this moment. This is your time." With a final glance at her army, Lyanna raised her sword. The signal had been given. The battle was about to begin. The clash of metal and the sound of battle cries echoed as the two armies met in the middle of the field. Lyanna's forces, though outnumbered, fought with a fierce determination that made up for any difference in size. They were fighting not for power, but for freedom. The king's forces, on the other hand, fought because they had been commanded to. The difference was clear. Lyanna led her soldiers into the fray, her sword flashing, as she cut through the opposition with a speed and precision that she had never imagined possible. Each strike, each movement, was a reflection of everything she had learned during her time on Earth. Every lesson, every challenge, every moment of failure. She was no longer the girl who had been sent away. She was a warrior, and the battlefield was where she truly belonged. As the battle raged on, Lyanna pushed forward, her mind focused on one goal: reaching the palace, where her father waited. She knew this would not be easy. Her father would not surrender easily. He would fight until the last, and she had no illusions about what lay ahead. The path to the palace was long and fraught with danger, but Lyanna fought her way through it, leading her army with strength and conviction. Every step brought her closer to the moment of truth, the moment when she would face her father, not as his daughter, but as his equal. When they finally reached the gates of the palace, the king's soldiers made one last stand. They were tired, their resolve beginning to waver, but they still fought with all their might. Lyanna's heart pounded as she faced them, knowing that the final confrontation was about to begin. Her father was inside, waiting. He had not yet seen the warrior she had become, but now there was no turning back. The doors to the palace swung open, and Lyanna led her forces inside. The king stood at the top of the grand staircase, his eyes cold and hard as ever. He did not seem surprised to see her. He had known this day would come. But Lyanna could see something else in his eyes, something that had never been there before. It wasn't just anger or disappointment. It was something closer to respect. "Lyanna," the king said, his voice low and steady, "you've come to challenge me, to take my place." Lyanna's grip on her sword tightened, but her voice was calm. "No, father. I've come to show you that I can lead, not because I'm your daughter, but because I've earned it. I've learned what it means to fight, to survive, and to lead. And now it's my turn." The king's eyes flickered with something, maybe regret, maybe pride, but it was fleeting. He stepped down from the stairs, drawing his own sword. "Then come, prove it." Father and daughter stood facing each other in the heart of the palace. The weight of their past, their family, and everything they had fought for was in the air between them. Lyanna knew that this fight was not just about strength. It was about everything they had both been through, everything they had lost. The clash of their swords was deafening. The sound of metal against metal echoed throughout the hall as father and daughter fought with all the strength they had. The king was powerful, his skills honed over a lifetime of war, but Lyanna was quicker, more agile, and she had learned to think ahead, to anticipate every strike.